May 23, 1934. Highway 154, just outside Ruston, Louisiana. Officer Frank Hamer had his service revolver aimed directly at Bonnie Parker's chest. 8 feet away. Clear shot. No cover between them. This wasn't supposed to happen. Frank was the best lawman Texas had ever produced. Tracked down 53 fugitives in his career. Never hesitated. Never missed. But standing there in the humid afternoon air, sweat running down his temple, finger on the trigger, he froze. And in that 5-second window of hesitation, Clyde Barrow did something that would save both their lives and change how America saw outlaws forever. To understand that moment, you need to understand who Frank Hamer really was. This wasn't some rookie cop or small-town sheriff. Frank was 51 years old, a former Texas Ranger with a reputation that made hardened criminals surrender without a fight. He'd been shot 17 times in the line of duty, survived ambushes that killed his partners. The state of Texas pulled him out of retirement specifically to hunt down Bonnie and Clyde. They'd robbed 15 banks, killed 9 officers, and embarrassed every police department from Dallas to Oklahoma City. Frank had been tracking them for 102 days straight, living in his car, following breadcrumbs, interviewing witnesses in every Dust Bowl town they hit. He knew their patterns, their hideouts, their families. He knew Clyde favored backroads and stolen Fords. He knew Bonnie wrote poetry and smoked cigars. He knew they were dangerous, reckless, and had nothing left to lose. May 23rd started like any other day on the hunt. Frank got a tip from an informant in Gibbsland. Bonnie and Clyde were heading to a safe house near Ruston. They'd be traveling Highway 154 around 3 p.m. Frank positioned himself behind an old service station, 1 mile from the county line, perfect ambush point. He waited 4 hours. At 2:47 p.m., he saw the dust cloud, a dark gray Ford V8 coming fast down the dirt road. Frank stepped out from behind the building, badge visible, revolver drawn. The car slowed. He expected them to speed up, to shoot first, to run like they always did. Instead, the car stopped. 30 yards away, engine still running, Frank started walking toward them, gun raised, calling out for them to step out with hands visible. The driver's door opened. Clyde Barrow stepped out, hands up, but not high. He was 26 years old, thin, wearing a brown suit jacket covered in road dust. He looked tired, not scared, just exhausted in a way that goes deeper than lack of sleep. Then the passenger door opened. Bonnie Parker emerged slowly. She was 24, barely 5 feet tall, wearing a red dress and carrying a revolver in her right hand, pointed at the ground. Frank's training kicked in, weapon visible, threat confirmed. He adjusted his aim from Clyde to Bonnie. Center mass, standard protocol. His finger touched the trigger. But then Bonnie did something unexpected. She smiled, not a threatening smile or a mocking one. A genuine, sad smile that reminded Frank of his daughter. She looked directly at him and said something he couldn't quite hear over the engine noise. Frank took 3 steps closer, now 8 feet away. Close enough to see the dark circles under her eyes. Close enough to notice she was limping. Close enough to realize she wasn't pointing her gun at him. She was holding it like she'd forgotten it was there. "I said," Bonnie repeated louder this time, "we're tired of running, officer." Frank's aim didn't waver. His training said shoot. His experience said shoot. Every dead officer's family said shoot. But something in her voice, something in the way she stood there, waiting for him to make the choice, made him hesitate. 4 seconds had passed since he'd aimed at her. In 4 seconds, he could have fired 3 times. Could have ended the most infamous crime spree in American history. Could have gone home a hero. Instead, he stood there, gun steady, but finger frozen. And that's when Clyde moved. What Clyde did next wasn't what anyone expected. He didn't reach for a weapon, didn't dive for cover, didn't try to get back in the car. Instead, he walked slowly toward Frank Hamer, hands still partially raised, and positioned himself directly between the officer's gun and Bonnie. Frank's instinct screamed to fire. You don't let suspects close the distance. You don't let them control the space. But Clyde wasn't charging. He was moving with deliberate calm, like a man approaching a skittish horse. When he was 5 feet from the barrel of Frank's revolver, he stopped. You're Frank Hamer, Clyde said quietly. Not a question, a statement. I know who you are. Read about you in the papers. Texas Ranger, the best they got. Frank's jaw tightened. Then you know I don't miss. Clyde nodded slowly. I know. But you also don't shoot unarmed women, do you? Frank's eyes flicked past Clyde to Bonnie. She'd set her revolver down on the hood of the Ford. Both hands now empty, raised at shoulder height. The wind caught her red dress, making it flutter. She looked small, vulnerable, nothing like the newspapers described. She's not unarmed, Frank said, though his voice carried less certainty. She just was. Clyde took one more step. Now he was close enough that Frank could see the scar above his left eye, close enough to see his hands trembling slightly, not from fear, from something else, exhaustion, desperation, relief. Officer Hamer, Clyde said, and his voice cracked just slightly. I'm going to reach into my jacket pocket. I'm not pulling a gun. I'm pulling out a letter. If you want to shoot me for that, go ahead. But let Bonnie walk away after. She didn't kill anyone. That was all me. Frank's finger stayed on the trigger, but he didn't fire. Clyde's hand moved slowly into his jacket. Frank could see the outline of a shoulder holster underneath. Clyde had a gun, could draw it right now, could try. But instead, he pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed and worn like it had been carried for months. He held it up so Frank could see both sides. Just paper. Then he unfolded it carefully. This is a letter from my mother, Clyde said. Written 3 months ago. She's dying, officer. Cancer. Doctor gave her until July. Maybe August if she's lucky. He held the letter out toward Frank. She asked me to come home. Said she'd forgive everything if I just came home before she passed. But I can't go home. You know why? Frank didn't answer. His training manual didn't cover this. Didn't prepare him for suspects who talked about their dying mothers on the side of a Louisiana highway. Clyde continued, Because the moment I step foot in Dallas, I'm a dead man, not arrested. Dead. Your colleagues made that clear. There's no trial waiting for me. There's a bullet. He gestured back at Bonnie. And she'll get the same. They'll riddle that car with so many holes they won't be able to identify our bodies. Frank had heard the talk, knew some of the boys wanted Bonnie and Clyde brought in dead, not alive, knew the anger ran deep after 9 officers killed, but he'd never been that kind of lawman. So, here's what I'm proposing, Clyde said, and now his voice was steady, clear, like a man who'd rehearsed this conversation 100 times in his head. You take us in, right now, just you. No backup, no ambush, no guns blazing. You get the credit, the biggest arrest of your career, and we get to live long enough to stand trial. The audacity of it stunned Frank into silence. Clyde pressed on. I know what we've done. I know what we deserve. But Bonnie deserves a chance to say goodbye to her mother, too. And my mama deserves to see her son one more time before she dies, even if it's through prison bars. Frank's mind raced. This could be a trick, a distraction. There could be others in the car, could be explosives, could be anything. But when he looked at Clyde's face, really looked, he saw something he hadn't seen in any of the surveillance photos or wanted posters. He saw a kid, a 26-year-old kid who looked 50, who'd made terrible choices and knew it, who was offering surrender not because he feared death, but because he feared dying without redemption. Behind Clyde, Bonnie had sat down on the ground, her bad legs stretched out in front of her. She was crying silently, shoulders shaking. Frank had read the reports. She'd been burned badly in a car crash 2 years ago, never healed right, was in constant pain, and still, she'd stayed with Clyde. Loyalty, or love, or madness. Maybe all three. Frank Hamer stood there for what felt like an eternity, but was really only 12 seconds. 12 seconds where he had to choose between the lawman he'd been trained to be and the man he'd sworn to himself he'd never stop being. His revolver was still aimed at Clyde's chest. One squeeze. That's all it would take. But instead, Frank did something that surprised even himself. He lowered his gun 6 inches, not holstered, not safe, but no longer pointed at a kill shot. Turn around, Frank said quietly. Both of you, hands behind your backs. Clyde's eyes widened slightly, not with fear, but with something that looked dangerously close to hope. He turned slowly. Bonnie struggled to stand, her injured leg buckling. Clyde moved to help her, but Frank barked, "Stay where you are!" She made it up on her own, limping badly, and turned her back to Frank. Frank approached carefully, pulling handcuffs from his belt. He cuffed Clyde first, tight but not cruel. Then Bonnie. Her wrists were so small the cuffs barely held. Up close, Frank could smell cigarette smoke and cheap perfume and something else. Fear. Real, human fear. "There's a gun in the car," Clyde said as Frank patted him down. "Two, actually. Under the driver's seat and one in the glove box, and a rifle in the trunk. I'm telling you so you don't think I'm hiding anything." Frank found Clyde's shoulder holster, loaded. Could have drawn it during their conversation. Didn't. That told Frank something important. He walked to the Ford, checked where Clyde said. All 3 weapons exactly where described. No tricks, no traps. Just 2 exhausted criminals who'd run out of road. Frank radioed for transport, but not for backup. Not yet. He wanted time to think this through. While they waited, Clyde talked. Not bragging, not confessing in the legal sense. Just talking like a man who hadn't had an honest conversation in years. He told Frank about growing up poor in Dallas. About stealing his first car at 14 because walking 5 miles to work in the Texas heat was killing him, slowly. About meeting Bonnie at a friend's house in 1930. About how she was married to someone else but hadn't seen her husband in 3 years. About how everything spiraled from small-time theft to armed robbery because once you cross certain lines, society doesn't let you cross back. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Clyde said, sitting on the ground now, hands cuffed behind him. "I did what I did. 9 officers dead. That's on me, on us. But I'm asking for a chance to face it like a man, not gunned down on a highway like a dog." Bonnie spoke for the first time since being cuffed. Her voice was hoarse. "My mama doesn't know half of what the papers say I did. She still thinks I'm coming home. Thinks this is all some big misunderstanding." She laughed bitterly. "Maybe I can write her from prison. Tell her the truth before she reads my obituary." Frank thought about his own mother. Dead 15 years now. Thought about the last conversation they'd had. How he'd promised her he'd always do the right thing. Not just the lawful thing. Sometimes those were the same, sometimes they weren't. The transport arrived 40 minutes later. 2 officers Frank trusted, men who'd follow his lead without question. "We're taking them to county jail," Frank announced. "Alive, unharmed, by the book." One of the officers started to protest, but Frank cut him off with a look that had silenced meaner men than him. The trial happened 3 months later. Bonnie and Clyde pled guilty to multiple charges. The prosecutor wanted death. The defense argued for mercy given their cooperation, Frank Hamer testified. Not for the defense, but not against them either. He told the truth, about the surrender, about the weapons Clyde disclosed, about the choice they made when they could have gone down shooting. The judge sentenced them to life imprisonment. No parole eligibility for 25 years. Bonnie's mother visited every Sunday for 6 years until she passed. Clyde's mother made it to the trial, saw her son one last time, and died peacefully 2 weeks later, knowing he was alive. In prison, Clyde taught himself to read properly. Bonnie wrote poetry that got published in small literary magazines. She never mentioned the crimes. Only wrote about dust and highways and dreams that died young. Frank Hamer retired 4 years later. In interviews, reporters always asked about Bonnie and Clyde. Expected him to regret not shooting them on Highway 154. But Frank always said the same thing. "I was hired to bring them to justice, not to execute them. Justice means a trial. Means facing what you've done. That day, they chose justice over death, and I chose to be a lawman, not a killer. I sleep better for it." May 23, 1934. A 5-second decision changed 3 lives. Clyde positioned himself between the gun and the woman he loved. Frank lowered his weapon and chose mercy over revenge. And Bonnie got to write one last letter to her mother.